behind this research. It really started in the 1900s with a guy called William James, and what he found was that there's a correlation between changes in consciousness and changes in performance. And then after that, Abraham Maslow in 1940s discovered that flow is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. He's really the person who coined the term peak performance. And really, he discovered that it is genuinely in all areas of our life, all areas of domain, whether it's art, music, sports, scientific discoveries. It really is in multiple areas. And that's really, says that it's fundamental. It's very fundamental to human nature. And in 1980s, the godfather of flow came along. His name is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and he was the first scientist, and his largest contribution to the field was his ability to actually define what flow was and then to measure it. And now that we can do that, it's much easier for us to go deeper and create more discoveries because we know how to actually measure flow. And so super excited that he continues to, till this day, do research in this area. One of my favorite scientists also is Dr. Andy Newberg, who's a neurosurgeon, and he wanted to study whether there is a unification in flow, whether there's a oneness to it. He studied it across multiple different religious, spiritual leaders, as well as non-religious and spiritual leaders, and really did find that there was a unification there. Tons of really interesting research, and I want to share with you what they found in what actually happens to our brain and how it changes in that specific moment, and what enables it to create such drastic results in creativity, productivity, learning, happiness. Super excited to share that with you. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi actually is discovered that there are three major characteristics to flow, and they are: firstly, you need to have a clear goal, and secondly, you need to know that this goal is something that is a stretch goal, i.e. it isn't something you have done in the past that is super easy for you to replicate, but it's also something you don't believe is completely impossible and would break you. So it's really about your perception of how much of a stretch this is, and that it is in fact a stretch. So you need to have a clear goal. It needs to be something that is worth stretching for and is going to require you to stretch. And you need to have immediate feedback. You need to be able to know how you're progressing along with this goal. So when you have those three characters, those are main characteristics that are involved in flow. I want to first bust a myth, and I know even whilst I was in mid school, this was something that was interesting to kind of even hear then was that the normal human brain is only working at 10% capacity. Imagine what it would be like if it was working at 100% capacity. And actually what we found is the exact opposite. When our human brain is working at its most optimal performance, it's actually working less than it normally would. It's because it has less resistance. It's able to use that energy more wisely and make those connections in a much more streamlined, efficient way. And if anything, it's the actual opposite. Your brain literally calms down, and it's much more precise and specific around what gets where and what gets activated. I think it's super cool that our brain can do that, and I want to share with you some other aspects of your brain that change as a result of us being in flow. Our brain is basically made up of three types of components. They're obviously all super connected and interrelated. One is our actual neuroanatomical structure, i.e. these are the neuron cells that are synapting or connecting to each other and enabling information to flow from one to the other. And when you get that in groups of neurons, you can actually eventually start creating waves, and that's your neuroelectrical signal. So we have that. And then as the information flows from one neuron to another neuron, the way it does that is through these neurochemicals. And these neurochemicals are also very unique in the state of flow. So let's talk about all three. In our neuroanatomical area, what actually happens in the state of flow is that your prefrontal cortex or neocortex, this is the part of your brain that makes you uniquely you as a human, you as your ability to kind of have executive functioning, to plan, to think, all of that really happens in this prefrontal cortex. This part of the brain actually quietens down and reduces its functioning during the state of flow. And secondarily, you have this other area which is called the temporal medial lobe. And this part of the brain is usually the one that enables you to criticize yourself. So it's the part of your brain that enables a lot of negative emotions. So the part of your brain that chastises you, or you're not good enough at this, you're not great at that, you're not good at public speaking, you're not good at you're not good looking, you're not too short, you're not too fat, whatever it is, it's commenting on. It's usually this negative part of your brain. And what's interesting is that in flow, that part of your brain also quietens down. So you don't have this like negative response to the new ideas that you could be coming up with. This actually allows you to brainstorm easier and actually get those ideas flowing easier, because you don't have a blocker that's stopping you from doing that. And the final thing, and this is very interesting, the space of unification, is that there's another part of your brain that actually also quietens down, the parietal lobe. And that part of your brain is the part of your brain that creates your sense of self. Like, this is my body, my hands, my fingers, and I am in relation to the surroundings around me, i.e. this room. And this part of your brain helps you when you're walking. It helps you avoid obstacles, dangers, the desk, or the pothole. Interestingly, this part of the brain also quietens, and you genuinely feel like your sense of self disappears or dissipates. So you feel more fluid between yourself and people around you, nature, animals. You have a higher degree of connection, and that is another reason why in the state of flow you can feel that kind of connectivity and that kind of happiness that comes along with that. So genuinely, your anatomy is performing in a different way in the state of flow. So we talked about the neuroanatomy of the brain and how it literally works differently in the state of flow. And we started to mention that neurons are connected to other neurons, and they are passing information to one and the other. And they're passing information by sending electrical impulses down their body, like what is like the axon. And as they pass information, at the end of this axon is what we call the synapse. And at this point, the axon can release chemicals if the electrical energy has raised to a certain potential or capacity. So as neurons are firing, they actually fire not just singularly, they can fire in groups. And as groups of neurons fire together, what we notice if we put an EEG on top of your skull is we can notice waves, brain waves. And this is just electrical impulses of groups of neurons. And interestingly, in your normal waking state, we have what's called beta waves. And these are normally very high frequency waves. And what that means is that multiple parts of your brain are active at the same time. And as I mentioned, in your normal waking state, you have your prefrontal cortex, your neocortex that's active, gives you the ability to think, to plan, to execute, have executive functioning skills, right? So that part of the brain, as well as other parts of the brain like parietal lobe, medial lobe, occipital lobe, all are kind of functioning and you see these like high frequency waves. In the state of flow, we actually start to see a decrease in frequency. We start to get alpha waves, and these alpha waves are the kind of waves you see when you are daydreaming. And for some of you who are more accustomed to daydreaming, you may find that when you daydream, you actually feel more relaxed, and this is one of the reasons why. And if you're in very deep states of flow, you can actually start to get theta waves, what is called like a alpha theta complex. And these theta waves are the kind of brain waves you get when you're in REM sleep. So yeah, again, much more lower frequency of waves, and something like 3 to 5 hertz. And it's only when you have theta waves that there's an opportunity for a very different and unique type of wave to show up, which is our gamma waves. And gamma waves are your aha moment waves. These are the waves that when someone makes that unique discovery, that new innovation, that ability to connect those dots, that aha moment, usually it coincides with them having a gamma wave. So gamma waves only come together, they're coupled with theta waves. So you need to get to a deep state of flow to enable yourself to even have the opportunity to have these gamma waves. We talked about that in our brain, when you have neurons that are firing, i.e. sending electrical impulses down, and when the electrical impulse reaches a certain threshold, it can actually release chemicals from what's called the synaptic end, and that synaptic end connects with another neuron. So in between space, it releases chemicals, and those chemicals are captured or detected by another neuron, and that neuron can then also create impulses or electrical impulses. So in their state of flow, what actually happens is that the chemicals that are being released can either be stimulators or inhibitors. And during a state of flow, we actually release 5 different types of stimulators all at once. And they are the reason why we feel like there's so much high, that we feel super happy, that we feel like amazing amounts of joy. Like we literally have like a huge outpouring of dopamine, of norepinephrine, serotonin, endorphins, anandamide. So we've got these like 5 different types of stimulators that make us feel a lot happier and feel a lot of high. I hope you can see why I find the brain so interesting, and how we can see the connection between our ability to have flow and how it changes our brain, right? Like on a neuroanatomy side, different parts of our brain are actually firing. On our brainwave side, we actually have different types of brain waves, and one of which can only come when we are at very low frequency. We have like a lot more stimulators that get released all at once, that cause us that feeling of joy and happiness and a huge high. So yeah, I just think the neuroscience behind all of this is so cool and so interesting, and there's a lot to discover around flow still, but I think even the discoveries that have already been made are very telling of why the state is interesting, and why it's worth us investigating it further in our own lives. So I kind of want to share with you what we can do in our normal life to be in a higher state of flow, because it does allow us to kind of perform better and be much happier. Brain has changed in this way, where we have lower frequency of waves, where our brain is literally firing in a different way, where different parts of the brain have actually just quietened down, where we actually have a whole burst of stimulators that have just like been released in our brain. What happens is that we get to do less of some things and more of other things. So we get to do less of self-criticizing. We get to do more of creativity, where we get to actually identify new data that's coming to us, and be able to understand that data better and be able to connect it and be able to find the intersection that hasn't been seen yet, i.e. the part around pattern recognition and that lateral thinking. We can actually use less energy, and our time for decision making reduces. And the other cool part is that because we are not criticizing ourselves as much, and we're coming up with new, interesting, creative thought, we actually are less risk taking, and that means we can execute better and take our ideas, the new formed ideas, and actually do something about it. And then finally, thing is that there is a sense of you being an agent, i.e. I'm here to do the work, without feeling like I need to be worried about how that work turns out, right? Like there isn't this like idea of like how will things be if they succeed or don't. It's more about being in the present moment. And again, I find that really interesting because some of the best spiritual teachers talk about this concept, and it's really interesting that actually connects back to our brain and the way our brain works. So how do you get into the state? I think you can get into the state in multiple ways, and each person is different. The one that I know that is common between most of the humans that I've at least come across is meditation, because that allows you to literally quieten parts of your brain and practice quietening them and practice concentration, so that the parts of your brain that are naturally inclined to go into flow do so at a much more lower threshold over time, because you have practiced enough that you have grown those parts of your neural cells in certain ways that allow you to get there faster. So we've seen like people who meditate, like monks and stuff, are able to get to a state of flow in a much more fluid and faster way. But even people who are just doing the things that they love, right? Like if you love writing poetry, if you love artwork, like you, by just doing what you love, you can be in a state of flow. Like I love to dance, and when I dance, I have no care in the world who's around me. I dance like I'm a total nutcase, and genuinely, like I feel like it doesn't matter who's there. I am going to be my complete self right now. And finally, like one of the other areas I've noticed you can be in state of flow is actually around other people. Have you noticed that sometimes you can find a deep friendship or a relationship where that connection feels like you're in a natural state of flow for whatever reason? Like the two of you are connected in a very deep way. That also can be you can be in a state of flow even in those situations. So yeah, with that, I'll say like practice meditation if you want to get there in a faster way, or and hopefully both, practice meeting the kinds of people that give you a lot of joy in your life, and doing the things that you already love, doing them more often, because the more often you do it, the easier it is to bring that state of flow in multiple areas of your life. So yeah, with that, I hope that that's exciting enough that you want to kind of go there, do this a little bit, and let me know if you have any questions, and I'd love to dig deeper on some of these topics.